Move it, fossil. Go die somewhere else. The shove wasn't hard, but it was cruel, loud enough to turn heads, sharp enough to send a 74-year-old man named Walter Bishop to the pavement, scattering his prescriptions across the concrete like broken dignity. He didn't shout, didn't beg. He just winced, picked up his crushed bottle of heart pills and limped away, alone, forgotten. The next morning, the street was quiet until four black SUVs pulled up in perfect formation. One by one, 12 Marines stepped out, their dress blues sharp, polished, unmistakable. They formed a circle around an old man at the bus stop, his hands trembling, his eyes wide. And when the youngest Marine reached into his coat and offered a Purple Heart, the world stopped to watch. Walter Bishop had always kept to himself. At 74, his body bore the quiet decay of time, but his posture, slightly hunched but steady, spoke of a man who'd endured worse than age. A Vietnam veteran, Walter lived alone in a small rented apartment tucked above a hardware store in a fading neighborhood on the edge of town. He walked with a subtle limp from a shrapnel wound that never quite healed right, and carried with him the kind of silence that comes from having seen too much and talked too little. That morning, Walter stood at the corner bus stop just like he had every Thursday. Clutched in his hand was a creased envelope from the VA clinic, and in his jacket pocket a small orange bottle of heart pills. He wore the same tan coat he'd had for a decade, frayed at the cuffs, the fabric thinned near the elbows, and held a brown paper bag containing day-old bread and a can of soup. To passers-by, he looked like any other old man, forgettable, slow-moving, out of place in a world that no longer paused for anyone. The bus stop itself sat on a busy downtown strip, bordered by chain stores, coffee shops, and glassy apartment buildings. It was morning rush hour, and the sidewalk buzzed with life, young professionals with coffee cups, students with earbuds in, a blur of motion and distraction. No one made eye contact anymore. It wasn't cruelty, it was habit. Indifference had become the default mode of urban living. Then came the teenagers, four of them, loud and confident, dressed in oversized hoodies and designer sneakers. They laughed too hard at things on their phones, cursed without context, and moved through the crowd like they owned the street. Walter noticed them but didn't flinch. He'd seen worse, far worse, and kept his eyes down. "Yo, Grandpa, you blocking traffic or what?" one of the boys shouted. Walter didn't respond. Another one snickered. "Move it, fossil! Go die somewhere else!" Then came the shove. It wasn't a brutal hit. It didn't need to be. It was careless, fast, and delivered with the full force of a society that had forgotten the value of age, sacrifice, or patience. Walter staggered backward, his heel catching the edge of the curb. The paper bag tore open, and the soup can bounced away as the heart pill bottle skittered across the concrete. Walter tried to steady himself, but his balance gave way. He fell hard. The sharp crack of his knee hitting the sidewalk echoed louder than it should have. His breath caught in his throat, more from shock than pain. He didn't cry out. He didn't shout. He just winced, gritted his teeth, and reached for the pill bottle, now resting against the gutter. The teenagers. They kept walking, laughing, the sound of their amusement echoing behind them like a bad song you can't get out of your head. And the people? They passed him. A woman in heels stepped over the scattered pills. A man in a business suit paused, looked at Walter, then veered slightly to avoid him. Someone further down took a picture, maybe for a meme, or maybe for awareness, but didn't help. No one bent down. No one asked if he was okay. Walter knelt on the pavement alone. His fingers, gnarled and scarred from years of hard labor, trembled as he collected the pills one by one. The label on the bottle was scraped from the fall, but he knew the dosage by heart. He didn't look up. He didn't need to see their faces. He'd seen the same kind of silence before, years ago in uniform, when they brought the wounded in from the jungle, and people looked away, unable to bear what war left behind. As he pushed himself upright, the flashback came fast and uninvited. Hugh City, 1968. Blood-soaked uniforms. A friend screaming for help. The choking smell of napalm in the morning haze. Walter had crawled through mud with bullets whistling inches from his skull to pull a comrade out of the line of fire. Back then, people had tried to kill him. Today, they just didn't care if he lived. And somehow, this hurt more. Derek Callahan had seen plenty in his time. Dust storms in Fallujah, mortar fire over Mosul, the dead silence of roads that should have been crowded. He'd served 2 tours with the Marines in Iraq before coming home and trading his rifle for a hard hat. Now, at 38, he worked construction on the west side of town, spending his days pouring concrete and framing houses that would stand a lot longer than the ones he'd seen blown apart overseas. But on that particular morning, Derek wasn't holding a hammer. He was waiting in his pickup truck, an old Ford F-150 with more rust than paint, while his fiancée ran into a nearby coffee shop for something hot before her shift. Parked across the street from the bus stop, Derek was halfway through scrolling the morning headlines when he saw movement from the corner of his eye. He looked up just in time to see the old man go down. The shove hadn't seemed violent. Quick, maybe careless. But it was the aftermath that stopped Derek cold. The sound of the man's body hitting the pavement, the slow, agonizing way he reached for his spilled pills, the way people stepped around him like he was trash on the sidewalk. Derek didn't move. Not immediately. He just watched. A part of him froze, like he was back in that damn Humvee outside Ramadi when their convoy got ambushed and the radio went dead. He'd move then, when it mattered. He always moved. That was the code. No one gets left behind. But here he was, sitting in a warm truck with a full thermos, watching an old man bleed into the concrete, and he had done nothing. By the time he threw open the door and crossed the street, the old man was already limping away, paper bag in hand, his eyes fixed on some distant place that Derek couldn't follow. The kids were long gone. The crowd was back to ignoring everything. And Derek stood there, jaw tight, fists clenched, unable to shake the look on the man's face. Not pain, not anger, just resignation, like he'd seen this 100 times before. That night, Derek couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall, the lamp casting long shadows across the worn drywall. His fiancée had drifted off beside him, unaware of the war raging in his head. "I was trained to never leave a man behind," he whispered into the darkness, his voice low and bitter. "And I did." It didn't matter that it hadn't been a battlefield. It didn't matter that there were no gunshots, no enemy forces, no chaos. That moment, on a sidewalk, in a peaceful town, had felt more damning than anything he'd seen overseas. Because here, in his own country, a fellow Marine had fallen, and no one had even blinked. By midnight, he couldn't take it anymore. He opened his phone and scrolled through old contacts, numbers he hadn't called in years. Guys from Bravo Company, from that miserable outpost south of Baghdad, from the nights they spent joking about home just to keep sane. He tapped one name, Ramirez. The call rang twice. "Derek?" The voice croaked on the other end. "Yeah, it's me," Derek said, rubbing his eyes. "I need a favor, and I need you to spread the word." "What kind of favor?" Derek took a deep breath. "You remember what we said, back in the Corps? That we look after our own, no matter what? Well, tomorrow morning I need every Marine who can stand upright to meet me at a bus stop downtown. Full dress blues. No questions?" There was a pause, then Ramirez answered with the same word they all used when things got serious. "Ura." Derek stared out the window into the dark, his reflection barely visible in the glass. He didn't know the old man's name, didn't know his story, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Tomorrow he would not be alone. By dawn, the group chat was alive with messages, no jokes, no politics, just one word repeated over and over, brotherhood. Derek hadn't needed to explain much. He'd simply said, "A Marine, Vietnam vet, was pushed yesterday. No one helped. I watched. I didn't move. I failed him. But we won't fail him tomorrow." The Marines understood. Across the county, some as far as 2 hours away, men shaved, pressed their dress blues, and laid out polished shoes with military precision. They didn't need orders. This wasn't about rank or ceremony. It was about honor and the unspoken code that never truly leaves a Marine, even after discharge. Never leave a man behind. Always stand for those who once stood for you. No one posted on social media. No hashtags, no cameras, just action. That morning, as the city stirred awake under a pale orange sky, The quiet street near the bus stop changed. Walter Bishop, unaware of what was unfolding around him, shuffled back to the same cracked slab of concrete where he had fallen just a day earlier. His knee was still sore. The cut had scabbed over, but his pride had not. He had debated not coming, but his appointment at the VA clinic was already delayed once, and Walter was nothing if not dependable. That was drilled into him in 1967 and never quite left. So he came, limping, alone, head held just high enough to hide the sting of yesterday. The street was calm. A pigeon flapped past. A woman jogged by without looking up. Normal, dull, routine. Then the first SUV arrived. A gleaming black Chevy Suburban rolled to a silent stop across the street. Then another. Then two more, pulling up in perfect diagonal formation, like a convoy entering a base. Doors opened. One by one, 12 Marines stepped out. Not in camouflage. Not casually dressed, but in full dress blue uniforms, the kind reserved for funerals, formal inspections, and the highest honors. Coats buttoned tight. White barracks covers angled precisely. Brass polished to a mirror shine. Shoes that clicked with authority against the pavement. They lined up in quiet formation. No one spoke. Walter noticed the movement from the corner of his eye. He turned slowly, unsure whether to move away or salute. But then one of the men stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, about 40, with a staff sergeant's insignia gleaming on his sleeve. He removed his hat and nodded once, respectfully. "Sir," he said, loud enough to be heard by everyone nearby, "are you Marine veteran Walter Bishop?" Walter blinked. His lips parted, but the words didn't come right away. "Yes," he finally managed. I am, but how do you—" The Marine extended a hand. "My name is Staff Sergeant Derek Callahan. Yesterday I saw what happened to you. I didn't act when I should have, and I'm here to make that right." Walter's eyes widened, his body frozen in confusion. Behind Derek, the other Marine stood still, shoulders square, eyes forward. Derek reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that speaks without speaking. "This," he said, opening the box to reveal a purple heart nestled in soft blue lining, "belonged to my grandfather. He served in Korea. He told me before he passed that this medal should only go to someone who earned it, not just through blood, but through dignity." Walter stared at the medal. His fingers trembled. His lips pressed together, holding back a flood of memory and disbelief. I can't accept that," he whispered. "You already earned it, sir," Derek said. "And I think my grandfather would want it in your hands more than a drawer." Walter didn't reach for it right away. His hands hovered near the box, as if afraid it might disappear. Then slowly, reverently, he took it, his thumb brushing the metal, his breath caught in his throat. His eyes filled with tears. Around them the Marines saluted, one by one, each stepping forward with practiced grace and solemn respect. It was not just a salute to rank, but to resilience, to history, to a man who had bled for his country and returned home to be ignored by it. A woman walking her dog stopped and stared. Then a man with a coffee paused, lowering his phone. A child tugged his mother's hand and pointed. And for a moment the entire block was still. 12 Marines, one old man, and a Purple Heart. No words, just honor. It started with silence. The same kind of silence Walter Bishop had known before. But this time, it wasn't filled with apathy. It was thick with awe. The city street, which just moments ago had been a blur of motion and noise, fell quiet as the image before them settled into view. 12 U.S. Marines standing in full-dress blues, saluting an old man who looked like he'd stepped out of a different century. For a heartbeat, no one knew what to do. Then a sound broke the stillness, a single clap. It came from a woman sitting on the bus bench across the street. She was old too, her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, hands wrinkled but steady. She clapped again and again, slow, firm, deliberate. It was the kind of applause not meant for entertainment, but for reverence. Someone else joined in, then another. Phones lifted, fingers tapped record. In a matter of seconds, the moment was immortalized in dozens of angles, shared live to friends, to family, to the wide unknown of social media. But it didn't feel staged. It felt sacred. Walter stood frozen at the center of it all. The Purple Heart medal rested in his palm, gleaming softly in the morning light. His eyes drifted from one face to another, some young, some old, some moved to tears. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something stir that he hadn't dared name in years. Recognition. And that's when it happened. The memory hit him like a sudden breeze, unbidden but sharp. Hugh City, 1968, the smell of smoke and wet concrete, the constant crackle of gunfire echoing off broken buildings. Walter was 18 days into his deployment when they sent his unit into the city. The Viet Cong had fortified entire neighborhoods, block by block. Civilians had fled or been caught in the crossfire. His platoon was pinned down in a collapsed hotel, bullets raining from across the street. That was the day Tommy Rodriguez took shrapnel to the chest. Tommy was the youngest of them, barely 18, from San Antonio, a quiet kid who had carried a photo of his sweetheart folded inside his helmet liner. The explosion came without warning. One second Tommy was laughing, the next he was screaming, blood soaking through his flak vest. The corpsman was 2 rooms away, under fire. No one could reach him. Walter didn't hesitate. He remembered diving forward, crawling through broken glass and splintered furniture, dragging Tommy into a corner while rounds chewed into the walls behind them. He used his own gear as a shield, his pack, his body, anything. He pressed his hands over the wound and kept talking. "Stay with me, Rodriguez. You're going home, remember. Maria's waiting." He said it again and again, louder each time, not just for Tommy, but for himself. Because if he stopped even for a second, they'd both disappear. Tommy survived. And now, decades later, Walter stood on a street in a country that had once turned its back on him, surrounded by strangers and brothers alike, and thought, "We weren't supposed to be heroes. We were just trying to survive." He looked down at the medal again, and his fingers closed around it like it was a lifeline. He wasn't thinking about the crowd. He wasn't thinking about the cameras or the headlines that might follow. He was thinking about Tommy, about the men who didn't come home, about the silence that had followed him ever since. Behind him, Derek Callahan stepped forward again and placed a hand on Walter's shoulder, firm, steady, without a word. Then the young Marine whispered, "You held the line, sir. It's our turn now." Walter blinked rapidly, swallowing the lump in his throat. He gave a small nod, not to accept praise, but to say thank you for remembering. In the background, someone murmured, "Who is he?" Another voice answered, "A Marine. That's all you need to know." The bus finally arrived, brakes hissing as it came to a stop. The Marines stood back in unison, forming an honor guard along the curb. The bus driver, visibly emotional, opened the door and stepped down to offer Walter a hand. But Walter didn't take it. He stood straighter than he had in years. And as he boarded the bus, holding the Purple Heart to his chest, the applause behind him continued, no longer polite but thunderous. A city waking up, a country remembering. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. It didn't take long. By noon that same day, videos of the Marines saluting Walter Bishop at the bus stop were already flooding social media. Angled from phones and security cameras, the footage varied in clarity, but one thing was crystal clear in all of them. An old man in a tan jacket, standing in the center of 12 U.S. Marines in full-dress blues, accepting a Purple Heart with tears in his eyes. The internet did what it always does, but this time, it wasn't mockery or outrage. It was reverence. The hashtag Mosh Respecter Veterans began trending by mid-afternoon. Within hours, it had passed 1 million uses. Instagram feeds were full of snapshots of Walter holding the medal. Twitter threads sprang up, detailing his Vietnam service and speculating about the significance of the moment. Facebook comments poured in from every corner of the country. Young people, veterans, even active duty service members. YouTube compilations began cropping up with titles like, "This is what honor looks like," and "They stepped over him yesterday." Then this happened. But the reactions weren't limited to strangers behind screens. The very kids who had mocked him, the ones who'd laughed and walked away as he lay bleeding, saw their actions mirrored in the virality of the video. One of them, Tyler Hensley, posted a public apology online, his face red with shame. "I didn't know who he was. We didn't even think. I'm sorry. He wasn't the only one. Dozens of handwritten letters began arriving at Walter's apartment over the next few days. Many from high school students, some anonymous, others brave enough to sign their names. They weren't filled with excuses. They were filled with remorse. One read, "Dear Mr. Bishop, I saw the video and recognized myself in the crowd. I walked past you that day. I didn't help. I'll never forget that. I hope someday I can make up for it." Another said simply, "Thank you for your service. I'm sorry we failed to show it sooner." News outlets picked up the story fast. The local ABC affiliate was first, airing a 3-minute segment titled, "A Moment of Respect in the Heart of the City." Then came CNN, Fox, and CBS, each running profiles on Walter, interviewing Derek Callahan, and airing the now famous footage of the Purple Heart ceremony. One anchor, visibly emotional, ended her broadcast with a quiet reflection. "In a world that moves too fast, this was a moment that made us all slow down." Even the mayor got involved. A week later, Walter received a personal visit from City Hall. The mayor presented him with a key to the city and announced the launch of a new community initiative, the Bishop Program, a veteran mentorship and awareness campaign aimed at connecting local students with aging veterans. The goal? To foster real relationships, not just likes and retweets. The first school to sign on was Central High, located just 3 blocks from the infamous bus stop. Every Monday, seniors would now meet one-on-one with veterans to share coffee, stories, and history lessons that never made it into textbooks. And they named the first chair of the program after Walter Bishop. He attended the first session. Nervous at first, he sat beside a shy 17-year-old named Noah, who asked softly, "Were you scared in Vietnam?" Walter smiled. Not a big smile, but a knowing one. "Every day. But you do the job anyway, not for glory, for the guy next to you." That line stuck with Noah, who wrote it in his notebook and later posted it online beneath a photo of them together. That post alone received over 80,000 shares. Walter, for his part, never understood the fuss. He still rode the same bus, still tended his tiny garden, still clipped coupons like always. But now when he walked to the corner store, people didn't rush past him. They stopped. They nodded. Some thanked him. Others simply made space on the sidewalk and looked him in the eye. The world hadn't changed overnight, but in one corner of one city, thanks to a moment of remembrance, a handful of Marines and one man who never stopped standing tall, it had started to remember what respect looked like. It had been nearly 6 months since the Morning 12 Marines stepped off those black SUVs. Since then, Walter Bishop's life had changed in quiet but unmistakable ways. He still rose early, still tended his modest garden, still rode the city bus to his VA appointments. But now the bus drivers knew his name. Local school kids would wave when they saw him at the corner. Even strangers sometimes asked to shake his hand. But on one cool Saturday morning in late autumn, Walter received a visit that would mean more than all the cameras, the medals, or the headlines. He was sitting on his porch, sipping coffee from his old Marine Corps mug, its handle chipped, the emblem faded from decades of dishwashing, when a black sedan pulled up in front of his house. From it stepped a young man in uniform, dress blues, crisp and squared away, with the insignia of a corporal gleaming on his collar. He was lean, sharp-eyed, with the quiet posture of someone who knew how to listen before speaking. He removed his cover respectfully and approached the porch with a straight back and the steady steps. "Excuse me, sir," the young man said. "Are you Walter Bishop?" Walter squinted slightly, lowering his coffee. "That's me," he said, setting the mug down. "How can I help you, Corporal?" The young Marine nodded once, then spoke with quiet reverence. "My name is James Rodriguez. Tommy Rodriguez was my grandfather." Walter froze. The porch fell utterly silent. James continued. "He told me about you, about Hugh City, about what you did to save his life. He said he owed everything, his marriage, his family, me, to you." Walter exhaled slowly, the memory hitting like a gust of wind. "Tommy, I haven't heard that name in years." "He passed last year," James said. "But before he did, he made me promise that if I ever found you, I was to tell you that you changed the course of 3 generations." Walter didn't speak right away. Instead, he motioned to the empty chair beside him. James sat. They talked for an hour. About war, about peace, about Tommy, how he'd returned home, married his sweetheart Maria, started a business, and raised 2 kids. James told Walter about his own decision to enlist, his deployments, the things that had changed and the things that hadn't. Walter mostly listened, occasionally nodding, offering the kind of sparse but weighty comments that only come from a man who's already said everything that needed saying years ago. When the coffee ran low and the clouds began to roll in, Walter stood slowly, walked into the house, and returned with a small, worn leather pouch. From it, he removed a silver coin, about the size of a quarter, aged and smooth, the edges dulled by time. He held it out to James. "Your grandfather gave me this the night before we shipped out," Walter said. "Said it was a good luck charm from his father. I carried it through the jungle, through mortar fire, through everything." James hesitated. "I couldn't—" Walter pressed the coin into his palm. "It's yours now," he said. "It's not just about luck. It's about carrying something forward, remembering what came before you." James looked down at the coin, then back up at Walter. "Thank you, sir." Walter smiled faintly. "You already thanked me, by showing up." They stood quietly on the porch, generations apart but bound by blood, sacrifice, and memory. As the wind picked up, Walter's old Marine cap fluttered on the table beside them. James reached over and placed a hand on it, straightening it with care. "Semper Fi," he said. Walter's voice was steady. "Always faithful, son. Always." The seasons turned. Leaves that once glowed with autumn fire now lay brittle on the ground. Snow had come and gone. The viral headlines had faded, the photos archived, the hashtags replaced by newer, noisier things. But for Walter Bishop, life had settled back into the gentle rhythm he always preferred. Quiet mornings, a cup of coffee on the porch, and the sound of birds greeting the day. He sat in his usual spot, wrapped in a flannel jacket, his hands resting on his knees. The bus stop where it all began was visible from his front porch now, just beyond the hedgerow, a small slab of concrete that had once held pain and later redemption. He was alone, but not forgotten. Beside him sat a small table. On it, folded with precision only a Marine would recognize, lay an American flag in a triangular case. Next to it, his weathered Marine cap. The Purple Heart he had once tried to refuse now rested in a small wooden box on the windowsill behind him. Not displayed for attention, but placed with meaning. A breeze rustled the garden he had tended with patient hands. Children's voices echoed faintly in the distance, likely part of the veteran mentorship group that now bore his name. Walter looked out at the road. No cameras, no applause, just the soft passing of cars, the rustle of trees, and a sky that had seen everything he'd endured. He took a breath, deep and steady, and leaned back in his chair. Then he whispered, not to the world, not to anyone watching, but to the memory of those who couldn't be here. "I don't need to be remembered. I just need them not to be forgotten." A pause. The wind picked up, tugging gently at the flag's glass. And in that moment, it was clear. Honor doesn't need headlines. Respect doesn't need to trend. It just needs to be passed on, from one generation to the next, from one quiet act to another, until forgetting is no longer possible. In today's fast-moving world, where people rush past each other with earbuds in and eyes glued to their screens, it's easy to forget the quiet lives lived in the margins, the veterans, the elders, the ones who once carried the burdens we now take for granted. Walter Bishop's story is more than just a powerful moment at a bus stop. It's a reminder of what respect, dignity, and memory really mean in a society that too often forgets its own heroes. We may not all be Marines. We may never wear a uniform. But each of us makes a choice every day to look away or to acknowledge someone's worth. A nod, a thank you, a helping hand. These small gestures can mean the world, especially to those who gave the best years of their lives for the country we live in. Ask yourself, would you have stepped in that day? Or would you have looked away like everyone else? Let us know in the comments. What does respect look like to you in today's America? Do you know a veteran whose story deserves to be told? Do you believe our culture does enough to honor those who served? And if this story moved you, even just a little, please consider giving it a like, subscribing for more true and meaningful stories like this one, and most importantly, share it with someone who might need the reminder. Because remembering doesn't belong to history books, it starts with us. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for carrying this story forward. God bless our veterans, and God bless you.